My name is Sage Martinez, and I am 28 years old. 3 months ago, my own sister nearly killed me with what she called a harmless prank. What started as a family barbecue turned into a medical emergency that landed me in intensive care for 4 days. But here is the thing about almost dying because of someone you trust completely. It gives you crystal clear perspective on exactly who deserves your loyalty and who deserves your carefully calculated revenge. Before we dive into this wild family betrayal story, I want to know where you are watching from. Drop your location in the comments below and smash that like button if you have ever dealt with toxic family members who crossed every possible line. Subscribe because this story has twists that will make your jaw drop, and trust me, you will want to see how perfectly karma served justice on a silver platter. The whole nightmare began on what should have been a perfect Saturday in July. My sister Raven had invited the entire family to her new house for a housewarming barbecue. Raven is 3 years older than me and has always been the golden child who could do no wrong in our parents' eyes. She married rich lives in a mansion and constantly reminds everyone about her perfect life through social media posts that make me want to throw my phone across the room. I arrived at her house around noon, carrying homemade potato salad that took me 3 hours to make from scratch. The moment I walked through her front door, Raven greeted me with that fake smile she reserves for people she considers beneath her. Her husband Derek was flipping burgers on their expensive outdoor grill while our parents fawned over their pristine backyard that probably cost more than my annual salary. Everything seemed normal until Raven offered to make me her special iced tea blend. She insisted it was a new recipe. She had been perfecting something with exotic herbs and natural ingredients that would boost my energy levels. I should have been suspicious, because Raven never does anything nice without an ulterior motive. But I was genuinely thirsty and thought maybe she was finally trying to be a decent sister. The iced tea tasted strange, slightly bitter with an unusual metallic aftertaste, but Raven kept encouraging me to drink more. She claimed the herbs needed time to work their magic and that I would feel amazing in about an hour. Our parents were completely absorbed in admiring Derek's new barbecue setup, so they missed the weird way Raven kept staring at me while I drank her concoction. About 45 minutes later, my world turned upside down. My heart started racing like I had just sprinted a marathon. My hands began shaking uncontrollably, and sweat poured down my face. Despite the comfortable temperature, I felt dizzy, nauseous, and completely disoriented. When I told Raven something was seriously wrong, she just laughed and said I was being dramatic as usual. But then my chest started feeling tight, like someone was squeezing my lungs with a giant fist. I could barely breathe, my vision became blurry, and I collapsed right there on her perfect patio furniture. That is when the laughter stopped, and everyone realized this was not some minor reaction to herbal tea. Derek called 911 while our parents panicked, and Raven suddenly became very quiet and pale. The paramedics arrived within minutes and immediately started asking questions about what I had consumed. When they heard about the special iced tea, they demanded to know exactly what ingredients Raven had used. Here is where everything got truly horrifying. Raven claimed she could not remember all the herbs she had mixed together because she had been experimenting with different combinations. She acted confused and scared, playing the innocent sister who had accidentally poisoned her sibling with a well-meaning health drink. But I caught something in her eyes during that chaos, a flicker of satisfaction that she tried to hide behind fake concern. The ambulance ride to the hospital was a blur of oxygen masks, IV lines, and medical professionals asking me questions I could barely answer. My heart rate was dangerously elevated, my blood pressure was through the roof, and my body was going into what the doctors later described as a severe toxic reaction. I spent the next 4 days in intensive care while they worked to identify exactly what had poisoned me and how to counteract its effects. The toxicology report revealed the shocking truth. Raven's special iced tea contained massive amounts of caffeine powder, enough to potentially cause heart failure or death in someone my size. But that was not even the worst part. Mixed in with the caffeine were traces of ephedra, a banned supplement that can cause strokes, heart attacks, and seizures when combined with high doses of caffeine. When the doctors explained that I had consumed what amounted to a dangerous drug cocktail disguised as herbal tea, I knew this was no accident. Raven had deliberately tried to hurt me, possibly even kill me, and then played innocent when her plan worked better than she probably expected. The medical team estimated that if I had consumed just a little bit more of her mixture, or if the paramedics had arrived even 10 minutes later, I would not have survived. My sister had literally attempted to murder me and then watched me suffer while pretending to be concerned for my well-being. But here's what Raven did not know about me. I am a paralegal who works for a law firm that specializes in personal injury cases. I understand evidence documentation and exactly how the legal system works. While I was lying in that hospital bed connected to machines that kept beeping to confirm I was still alive, I started planning my response. I quietly requested copies of all my medical records, the toxicology reports, and documentation of every test they performed during my stay. I had the nurses photograph my condition at its worst, when I looked like death and could barely stay conscious. I saved every medical bill, every insurance claim, and every piece of paperwork related to my treatment. Most importantly, I had Derek secretly collect samples of the remaining iced tea from Raven's kitchen before she could dispose of the evidence. He was horrified when he learned how close I had come to dying and agreed to help me document everything his wife had done. The total cost of my medical treatment came to $47,000. 4 days in intensive care, multiple specialists, emergency interventions, and ongoing monitoring had created a mountain of medical debt that my insurance only partially covered. But those bills were about to become Raven's problem, not mine. Recovery gave me plenty of time to think, and what I discovered about my sister during those weeks of healing made my blood run cold. While researching her social media history and talking to family friends, I learned that this was not Raven's first dangerous prank. She had a pattern of escalating behavior that everyone had been dismissing as harmless sibling rivalry or attention-seeking. When we were teenagers, Raven had accidentally pushed me down a flight of stairs during a family gathering, claiming I had slipped. I ended up with a sprained ankle and bruised ribs, but everyone believed her story because she seemed so upset about the incident. Looking back with adult eyes, I remembered the calculating look on her face right before I fell, and how quickly she had positioned herself to appear innocent. In college, she had spread rumors about me cheating on exams, nearly getting me expelled from my program. When confronted, she claimed someone must have misunderstood her comments about my study habits. The rumors were never traced back to her definitively, but they damaged my reputation for years and cost me several academic opportunities. More recently, she had sabotaged my relationship with my ex-boyfriend Marcus by telling him I was seeing someone else behind his back. She provided just enough fake evidence to make her lies believable, including photoshopped images and fake text message screenshots. Marcus and I broke up over her manufactured evidence, and I only learned the truth months later when his friend admitted Raven had approached him with her false information. The pattern was clear. Raven had been systematically trying to destroy my life for years, but she had finally crossed a line that could have killed me. This was not sibling rivalry or jealousy anymore. This was attempted murder disguised as a prank, and I was done being her victim. My first step was hiring my own attorney, someone outside the firm where I worked, to avoid any conflicts of interest. Jennifer Walsh was a specialist in assault cases and personal injury law with a reputation for taking down people who thought they were untouchable. When I showed her the evidence I had collected, including the medical records and the remaining tea samples, her eyes lit up with professional satisfaction. Jennifer confirmed what I already suspected. Raven had committed multiple felonies, including assault with a deadly weapon, reckless endangerment, and potentially attempted murder, depending on how prosecutors wanted to frame the case. The evidence was overwhelming, and the medical documentation proved both intent and severe harm. But before we involved law enforcement, Jennifer suggested we give Raven an opportunity to make things right privately. This was where my legal background became invaluable, because I knew exactly how to construct a settlement demand that would either get me justice or provide even more evidence of her guilt. I drafted a comprehensive demand letter that read like a medical bill from hell. Every single expense related to my poisoning was itemized with surgical precision. The 4 days of intensive care at $8,000 per day, specialist consultations with cardiologists, toxicologists, and neurologists, emergency medications, diagnostic tests, and monitoring equipment, follow-up appointments, and ongoing cardiac evaluations to ensure no permanent damage. But I did not stop at medical expenses. I included lost wages from the 2 weeks I could not work while recovering, pain and suffering damages calculated using standard legal formulas, future medical monitoring costs because the doctors wanted to track my heart function for at least a year, even the cost of replacing clothes that had been cut off me in the emergency room. The total demand came to $123,000 payable within 30 days, along with a written admission of responsibility for my injuries. The letter explained that this was her opportunity to resolve the matter privately before I filed criminal charges and a civil lawsuit that would become public record. I also included a detailed timeline of her previous attacks on me, making it clear that this was not an isolated incident, but part of a pattern of escalating violence. The letter stated that any future contact with me or attempts to harm my reputation would result in immediate legal action and criminal prosecution. The most important part of my demand was the evidence I provided to prove I was serious. I included copies of the medical records showing how close I had come to dying, photographs of me in the hospital looking like a corpse, and lab results proving the dangerous substances she had given me. I wanted her to see exactly what her prank had done to my body and understand that I had documented everything. Jennifer reviewed my draft and added some legal language that made the consequences of ignoring my demand crystal clear. If Raven failed to respond or refused to pay, we would immediately file both criminal charges and a civil lawsuit seeking punitive damages that could easily exceed $500,000. We would also seek a restraining order and press for the maximum criminal penalties, including potential jail time. The letter was sent via certified mail to ensure Raven could not claim she never received it. We also sent copies to Derek and my parents, making sure everyone in the family understood exactly what had happened and what the consequences would be if Raven did not take responsibility for her actions. While we waited for her response, I continued gathering evidence and building my case. I reached out to Marcus and other people Raven had manipulated over the years, documenting her pattern of deception and escalating violence. Several of them agreed to provide written statements about her behavior, creating a comprehensive picture of someone who had been causing harm for years without facing any real consequences. I also researched Raven's financial situation and discovered she was not as wealthy as she pretended to be. Derek's business was struggling. They had massive credit card debt, and their expensive lifestyle was largely financed through loans secured by their house. A lawsuit demanding significant damages would probably force them into bankruptcy, especially if criminal charges resulted in Derek's professional licenses being affected. This information gave me additional leverage, but it also confirmed that Raven's attacks on me were likely motivated by jealousy and resentment about my stable career and financial independence. She had been projecting an image of success while secretly struggling, and my presence at family gatherings reminded her of everything she was failing to achieve honestly. The 30-day deadline I had given her was approaching, and I had not heard a single word from Raven or her husband. No apology, no attempt to negotiate, not even an acknowledgement that she had received my demand letter. Her silence was about to become very expensive because I was prepared to escalate this situation to levels she never imagined possible. Raven's complete silence for 3 weeks told me everything I needed to know about her character and her strategy. She was either hoping I would just give up and go away, or she was consulting with her own attorney to figure out how to minimize her legal exposure. Either way, her refusal to even acknowledge what she had done to me proved that she felt no remorse and would likely try to hurt me again if given the opportunity. But what Raven did not realize was that her silence was actually helping my case. Every day that passed, without any attempt to make things right, demonstrated her callous disregard for my well-being and strengthened my position for both criminal prosecution and civil litigation. Jennifer had warned me that judges and juries tend to be particularly harsh on defendants who show no remorse for serious injuries they have caused. During that waiting period, I received an unexpected phone call that changed everything about my approach to this situation. Derek called me late one evening, speaking in whispers because Raven was supposedly asleep upstairs. He was terrified, guilt-ridden, and desperate to confess what he knew about his wife's behavior. Derek revealed that Raven had been planning to hurt me for months before the barbecue. She had been researching different substances and methods online looking for ways to cause me serious harm without getting caught. He had found browser history on their shared computer, showing searches for things like untraceable poisons, natural substances that cause heart attacks, and how much caffeine can kill someone. Even more disturbing, Derek admitted that Raven had practiced her poisoning technique on their neighbor's dog several months earlier. The poor animal had become violently ill after Raven gave it treats laced with caffeine powder, but the veterinarian assumed it was an allergic reaction or accidental poisoning. The dog survived, but Derek said Raven seemed disappointed that her test had not been more effective. This information transformed my case from assault to premeditated, attempted murder. Raven had not acted impulsively or made a terrible mistake with herbal tea ingredients. She had deliberately researched how to poison me, tested her methods on an innocent animal, and then executed her plan at a family gathering where she thought she could maintain plausible deniability. Derek agreed to provide written testimony about everything he knew, including access to their computer records and any physical evidence Raven might have hidden. He was divorcing her anyway because he could not live with someone capable of attempted murder, and he wanted to protect himself legally by cooperating with my case. But Derek also provided me with something even more valuable than evidence: inside information about how Raven was responding to my demand letter. She had indeed consulted with an attorney, but she was telling everyone that I was making everything up for attention and money. She claimed the medical records were fake, that I had poisoned myself to frame her, and that my entire family should rally around her against my false accusations. This reaction was perfect for my purposes because it showed consciousness of guilt combined with a complete refusal to take responsibility. Raven was digging herself deeper into legal trouble with every lie she told, and her attempts to turn the family against me were failing spectacularly. My parents had initially been confused and upset about the situation, wanting to believe that their older daughter could never do something so horrible. But when I showed them the medical records, the toxicology reports, and Derek's testimony, they were forced to confront the reality of what Raven had done. The evidence was too overwhelming to dismiss or explain away. My mother was particularly devastated because she remembered all the previous incidents between Raven and me, and she was starting to realize that they had not been accidents or misunderstandings. She felt guilty for not protecting me from my sister's escalating violence and was determined to support me in seeking justice. My father was angry in a way I had never seen before. He kept saying that he had raised Raven to be better than this, and that her actions reflected a fundamental failure of character that he could not understand or forgive. Both of my parents agreed to provide statements supporting my case and confirming Raven's pattern of harmful behavior over the years. With my family's support secured and Derek's testimony documented, I decided to expand my investigation into Raven's background. I hired a private investigator to research her activities over the past few years, looking for other victims or incidents that might establish an even longer pattern of dangerous behavior. The investigator's report was shocking. Raven had been fired from 2 previous jobs for suspicious incidents involving coworkers who became mysteriously ill after eating food she had prepared for office parties. In both cases, the illnesses were severe enough to require hospitalization, but no one had connected them to Raven's contributions to the events. Additionally, the investigator found that Raven had been involved in several car accidents over the past 5 years, all of which involved other drivers who had somehow cut her off or disrespected her on the road. The accidents always seemed to be the other driver's fault, but the frequency and circumstances suggested that Raven might have been deliberately causing collisions to punish people who annoyed her. Most disturbing of all, the investigator discovered that Raven had been volunteering at a local animal shelter, and several animals in her care had died under mysterious circumstances. The shelter had not suspected deliberate harm, because animal deaths unfortunately happen in rescue situations, but the pattern of healthy animals suddenly becoming critically ill while in Raven's care was statistically suspicious. This information painted a picture of someone who had been escalating from animal abuse to human targets using increasingly sophisticated methods to harm others, while maintaining plausible deniability. My case was no longer just about one incident of poisoning, it was about stopping a dangerous individual who was likely to hurt more people if she faced no consequences for her actions. Jennifer was thrilled with the additional evidence because it established Raven as a clear threat to public safety, not just someone who had made a terrible mistake with her sister. Prosecutors would be much more likely to pursue serious charges against someone with a pattern of harming multiple victims, both human and animal. As the 30-day deadline for Raven's response approached, I made one final preparation that would ensure maximum impact when I filed my criminal complaint. I had been documenting my ongoing recovery and the lasting effects of her poisoning, including irregular heartbeats, anxiety attacks triggered by certain smells or tastes, and persistent fatigue that affected my work performance. My cardiologist confirmed that the damage to my heart muscle might be permanent, requiring ongoing monitoring and potentially limiting my life expectancy. This medical testimony would be crucial for establishing the serious bodily injury necessary for felony assault charges, and it would significantly increase any financial damages in civil court. I also prepared a comprehensive media strategy because I wanted Raven's actions to have social consequences as well as legal ones. Her reputation and social standing were clearly important to her, and I wanted to make sure everyone in our community knew exactly what kind of person she really was beneath her perfect exterior. The night before the deadline expired, I received one final piece of information that sealed Raven's fate. A former coworker reached out to me after hearing about my situation through mutual friends. She told me that Raven had actually bragged about poisoning me, describing it as the perfect crime, because no one would ever believe sweet little Sage could be the victim of attempted murder by her own sister. According to this witness, Raven had laughed while describing my symptoms and had expressed disappointment that I had survived the experience. She had also mentioned that she was planning to try again with a different method if I recovered, and continued to be a problem for her. This testimony proved premeditation, ongoing intent to cause harm, and a complete lack of remorse. Combined with all the other evidence I had gathered, it guaranteed that Raven would face the full consequences of her actions when I filed my complaint the next morning. The 30 days were up and Raven had chosen silence over accountability. Now it was time for her to learn that some actions have consequences that no amount of privilege or manipulation can avoid. The morning after Raven's deadline expired, I walked into the district attorney's office, carrying 3 thick binders of evidence and a determination that had been building for 31 days. Jennifer accompanied me as we met with prosecutor Amanda Chen, who specialized in domestic violence and assault cases involving family members. Amanda's expression grew increasingly serious as she reviewed my documentation. The medical records showing near-fatal poisoning, Derek's testimony about premeditation, the computer searches for lethal substances, and witness statements about Raven's bragging created an airtight case for attempted murder in the first degree. Within 2 hours of our meeting, criminal charges were filed against Raven Martinez Thompson on multiple felony counts: attempted murder, assault with a deadly weapon, reckless endangerment, and animal cruelty based on the shelter investigation. The charges carried a potential sentence of 15 to 25 years in prison if convicted on all counts. Simultaneously, Jennifer filed a civil lawsuit seeking $2.7 million in damages, including medical expenses, lost wages, pain and suffering, punitive damages, and ongoing medical monitoring costs. We also requested an immediate restraining order prohibiting Raven from contacting me or coming within 500 yards of my home or workplace. The arrest warrant was executed that same afternoon while Raven was having lunch at an expensive restaurant with friends from her social circle. According to Derek, who witnessed the scene, 4 police officers arrested her in front of a packed dining room while she screamed about false accusations and demanded they contact her attorney. Local news stations picked up the story within hours because attempted murder cases involving affluent suburban families always attract media attention. The headlines read, "Local woman arrested for allegedly poisoning sister at family barbecue," and "Sibling rivalry turns deadly poison plot exposed through medical evidence." But the media coverage was just the beginning of Raven's public humiliation. I had prepared a detailed social media campaign exposing her pattern of abuse and manipulation, complete with court documents, medical records, and photographs of my condition during hospitalization. Within 24 hours, her carefully curated online image was completely destroyed. Her friends and social contacts began distancing themselves immediately. The country club where she played tennis revoked her membership pending the outcome of her case. Derek's business partners forced him to buy them out because they did not want to be associated with someone married to an attempted murderer. Most satisfying of all, the animal shelter where Raven had been volunteering launched their own investigation into the suspicious deaths that had occurred during her shifts. The local SPCA offered a reward for information about her activities, and several former volunteers came forward with disturbing stories about her behavior around sick or injured animals. Raven's attorney tried to negotiate a plea deal immediately, recognizing that the evidence against his client was overwhelming and that a jury trial would likely result in maximum sentences on all charges. He proposed pleading guilty to simple assault in exchange for probation and restitution for my medical bills. Jennifer and I rejected this offer without hesitation. Raven had shown no remorse, had attempted to destroy my reputation even after being arrested, and had spent years escalating her attacks on multiple victims. She deserved to face the full consequences of her actions, not receive a slap on the wrist that would allow her to hurt someone else in the future. The prosecution agreed with our position and refused to offer any reduced charges. Amanda Chen was particularly motivated to pursue maximum penalties because the evidence suggested Raven posed an ongoing threat to public safety that could only be addressed through significant prison time. While the criminal case proceeded, Derek provided additional evidence that further damaged Raven's position. He found insurance policies she had secretly taken out on my life 6 months before the poisoning incident, naming herself as the beneficiary. The policies totaled $500,000 and had been purchased using forged signatures and false information about our relationship. This discovery transformed the case from attempted murder to attempted murder for financial gain, which carried even harsher penalties under state law. The insurance fraud also opened up federal charges that could add additional years to any prison sentence. Raven's mental state deteriorated rapidly as the full scope of her legal troubles became clear. She was denied bail because the judge considered her a flight risk and a danger to the community. Her expensive attorney withdrew from the case when she could no longer afford his fees after Derek froze their joint accounts and filed for divorce. The public defender assigned to her case immediately advised her to accept whatever plea deal the prosecution might offer, but it was too late for negotiations. Amanda Chen had decided to make Raven's case an example of how seriously the justice system takes domestic violence and attempted murder, regardless of the perpetrator's social status. During the preliminary hearing, I testified about the poisoning incident and its lasting effects on my health and well-being. The courtroom was packed with media, family members, and members of the community who wanted to see justice served. Raven sat at the defense table, looking nothing like the polished socialite she had pretended to be for years. My testimony was devastating to her case because I could speak knowledgeably about the legal implications of her actions while also conveying the personal trauma of being betrayed by someone I had trusted completely. The judge's reaction to the medical evidence and Derek's testimony about premeditation made it clear that Raven would be held without bail until trial. But the most powerful moment came when the prosecutor played a recording Derek had secretly made of Raven laughing about my poisoning and planning future attacks. Her own words, captured without her knowledge, proved consciousness of guilt and ongoing intent to cause harm better than any other evidence could have. The preliminary hearing ended with all charges being bound over for trial, and a trial date was set for 3 months later. Raven's new public defender immediately filed motions challenging the evidence, but Jennifer was confident that none of them would succeed given the overwhelming documentation we had provided. As we left the courthouse that day, I felt a sense of satisfaction that had nothing to do with revenge and everything to do with justice being served. Raven had spent years hurting people without consequences, escalating from emotional manipulation to physical violence to attempted murder. Now she would finally face accountability for her actions, and other potential victims would be protected from her dangerous behavior. The civil case was proceeding simultaneously, and Derek had agreed to testify against his wife in exchange for immunity from any conspiracy charges. His cooperation was crucial because he had access to financial records and communications that proved Raven's pattern of planning and executing attacks on multiple victims over several years. Within 6 weeks of filing charges, Raven's entire life had collapsed. Her marriage was over, her social reputation was destroyed, her financial resources were exhausted, and she was facing decades in prison. Most importantly, she could no longer hurt anyone else while she awaited trial in county jail. The 3 months between Raven's preliminary hearing and her trial were a masterclass in how quickly someone's carefully constructed facade can crumble when the truth finally comes to light. What had taken her years to build through manipulation and deception was destroyed in a matter of weeks once the evidence of her crimes became public. Derek's divorce proceedings revealed the shocking extent of Raven's financial deception during their marriage. She had been forging his signature on loans, secretly mortgaging their house multiple times, and using his business credit lines to fund her expensive lifestyle. The mansion everyone envied was actually owned by 3 different banks, and Derek was facing bankruptcy because of debts he never knew existed. Even more disturbing, Derek discovered that Raven had been stealing from his business clients, skimming money from accounts she managed, and blaming discrepancies on accounting errors or bank mistakes. Several clients were preparing their own criminal charges against her for embezzlement and fraud, adding to the growing list of felonies she would face at trial. The investigation into her activities at the animal shelter had also expanded beyond what anyone initially suspected. Forensic veterinarians exhumed the bodies of 12 animals that had died under suspicious circumstances while in Raven's care, and toxicology tests revealed that 8 of them had been deliberately poisoned with the same substances she had used on me. These findings resulted in additional felony charges for animal cruelty and abuse, each carrying potential prison sentences that would run consecutively with her attempted murder conviction. The local SPCA estimated that Raven had killed or seriously injured dozens of animals over the 2 years she had volunteered at the shelter. But perhaps the most damaging revelation came when investigators discovered Raven's detailed journals documenting her experiments with different poisons and her plans for future attacks. She had been keeping meticulous records of what substances worked best, how much was needed to cause specific symptoms, and which victims would be easiest to target without getting caught. The journals revealed that I was not her intended final victim. I was practice for a much larger plan, involving multiple family members and coworkers who had somehow offended her over the years. She had been systematically working her way through a hit list of people she wanted to punish, using increasingly sophisticated methods to avoid detection. Reading excerpts from those journals during court proceedings was like discovering I had been living with a serial killer who happened to share my DNA. Raven had written about watching me suffer during the poisoning with the same detached clinical interest someone might use to describe a science experiment. She felt no guilt, no remorse, and no human connection to the pain she was causing. The media coverage of these revelations turned Raven into a local symbol of hidden evil lurking behind suburban perfection. True crime podcasts picked up her story, documentaries were being planned, and her case was cited by experts as an example of how domestic violence can escalate to attempted murder when early warning signs are ignored. Her former friends and social contacts were horrified to learn how close they had come to being her victims. Several admitted they had experienced suspicious illnesses after eating food. Raven had prepared for various social events, but they had never connected their symptoms to deliberate poisoning. The psychological evaluation ordered by the court painted a picture of someone with severe antisocial personality disorder, combined with narcissistic traits that made her incapable of empathy or genuine human connection. The psychologist who examined her described Raven as one of the most dangerous individuals she had ever assessed, someone who viewed other people as objects to be manipulated or destroyed based on her emotional needs. This evaluation supported the prosecution's argument that Raven posed an ongoing threat to society and should receive the maximum possible sentence on all charges. The report specifically noted that she showed no remorse for her actions and was likely to reoffend if ever given the opportunity. As the trial date approached, Raven's legal situation became increasingly desperate. Her public defender was overwhelmed by the volume of evidence and the complexity of defending against multiple felony charges with such clear documentation of guilt. He had repeatedly advised her to accept a plea deal, but the prosecution was no longer offering anything less than 20 years in prison. The financial consequences of her crimes were equally devastating. The civil lawsuit Jennifer and I had filed was proceeding simultaneously with the criminal case, and Derek's cooperation had provided us with complete documentation of Raven's assets and debts. Even if she somehow avoided prison, she would spend the rest of her life paying restitution to her victims. My own recovery had been progressing slowly but steadily during this period. The irregular heartbeats and anxiety attacks were becoming less frequent with medication and therapy, but my cardiologist confirmed that some damage to my heart muscle would be permanent. This medical testimony would be crucial during the sentencing phase if Raven was convicted. More importantly, I was discovering a sense of inner strength I never knew I possessed. Standing up to someone who had terrorized me for years and successfully exposing her crimes had been empowering in ways I could never have anticipated. I was no longer the victim of my sister's manipulation. I was the person who had stopped a dangerous criminal from hurting anyone else. The support I received from unexpected sources during this period was overwhelming. Former coworkers from Raven's previous jobs contacted me to share their own stories of suspicious illnesses and workplace incidents. Neighbors reported strange behaviors they had witnessed, but never reported because they seemed too bizarre to be believable. Even people who had never met Raven personally reached out to express support and share their own experiences with toxic family members who had crossed legal and ethical boundaries. My story had resonated with anyone who had ever been gaslighted, manipulated, or abused by someone they were supposed to be able to trust. The week before trial was scheduled to begin, Raven made one final attempt to avoid accountability for her actions. Through her attorney, she offered to plead guilty to attempted assault and pay full restitution for my medical bills in exchange for a sentence of probation and community service. This desperate last-minute offer was rejected immediately by both the prosecution and by me personally. After everything Raven had done, and all the evidence showing she was a serial criminal who had been escalating toward multiple murders, probation was not an adequate consequence for her actions. Amanda Chen was particularly firm in rejecting any deal that would allow Raven to avoid prison time. The prosecutor explained that accepting such a plea would send a dangerous message that attempted murder could be resolved with financial payments, especially when the perpetrator showed no genuine remorse for their actions. As I prepared to testify at trial about the most traumatic experience of my life, I felt ready to face whatever Raven's defense team might throw at me. The evidence was overwhelming, the case was airtight, and justice was finally within reach after months of preparation and investigation. The trial began on a cold Monday morning in November, exactly 4 months after Raven had tried to kill me with her poisoned iced tea. Walking into that courtroom knowing I had the evidence to prove every single thing she had done to me was one of the most empowering moments of my entire life. Raven looked nothing like the polished socialite who had once intimidated me with her perfect house and expensive clothes. Months in county jail had stripped away all her pretense, revealing the hollow, dangerous person she had always been underneath her carefully constructed facade. The prosecution's case was methodical and devastating. Amanda Chen presented the medical evidence, first showing the jury exactly what Raven's poison had done to my body and how close I had come to dying. The photographs of me in intensive care, unconscious and connected to life support machines, visibly shocked several jurors who kept glancing at Raven with obvious disgust. Derek's testimony about finding the computer searches for lethal substances and the insurance policies Raven had secretly taken out on my life established clear premeditation. His voice shook as he described discovering his wife's journals and realizing he had been married to someone capable of serial murder. But the most powerful evidence was Raven's own words from the recordings Derek had made. When the jury heard her laughing about my poisoning and planning future attacks, several of them looked physically ill. One juror had to leave the courtroom briefly because she started crying during the playback of Raven, describing my suffering as entertaining. My testimony lasted 2 full days as I walked the jury through years of escalating abuse that had culminated in attempted murder. I explained how Raven had systematically undermined my relationships, sabotaged my career opportunities, and physically attacked me while maintaining plausible deniability until she finally went too far. The defense attorney tried to portray me as a jealous sister, seeking attention and money through false accusations, but the mountain of physical evidence made his arguments sound desperate and unconvincing. When he suggested I had poisoned myself to frame Raven, several jurors actually laughed at the absurdity of his claim. The animal cruelty charges were particularly damaging to Raven's case because they established a clear pattern of escalating violence that had progressed from animals to humans. The veterinary testimony about the deliberate poisoning of shelter animals created a picture of someone who enjoyed causing suffering and had been practicing for more serious crimes. After 5 days of testimony, the case went to the jury on Friday afternoon. They deliberated for less than 3 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all charges: attempted murder in the first degree, assault with a deadly weapon, animal cruelty, insurance fraud, and embezzlement. The speed of their decision reflected how overwhelming the evidence had been. Raven showed no emotion when the verdicts were read, but her attorney visibly slumped in his chair. He knew the sentencing guidelines for her crimes would likely result in a prison term of 25 to 30 years, effectively a life sentence for someone her age. The sentencing hearing 2 weeks later gave me the opportunity to deliver a victim impact statement that I had been preparing for months. I spoke directly to Raven about the lasting trauma her actions had caused, not just the physical damage to my heart, but the psychological impact of being betrayed by someone I had trusted completely. I also addressed the broader implications of her crimes, emphasizing that she had been escalating toward multiple murders and would have continued killing if she had not been stopped. The judge listened intently as I described my ongoing medical issues and the permanent changes to my life caused by her poisoning. When it was Raven's turn to speak, she maintained her innocence and claimed she was the victim of a conspiracy involving Derek, myself, and the prosecution. Her complete refusal to accept responsibility or show any remorse clearly influenced the judge's final sentencing decision. The judge sentenced Raven to 32 years in prison without the possibility of parole for 25 years. He specifically noted that her lack of remorse and the premeditated nature of her crimes required the maximum possible sentence to protect society from her dangerous behavior. The civil lawsuit was resolved through a settlement negotiated while Raven awaited sentencing. Derek agreed to pay $2 million from the couple's remaining assets and future earnings to compensate me for medical expenses, lost wages, pain and suffering, and ongoing medical monitoring. The settlement also included a formal admission of liability that would prevent Raven from ever claiming innocence in the future. But beyond the legal victories and financial compensation, the most important outcome of this entire experience was discovering who my real family truly was. My parents had supported me completely throughout the investigation and trial, finally understanding the extent of Raven's manipulation and abuse over the years. Derek remained a close friend and ally, grateful that I had exposed his wife's true nature before she could destroy his life completely or hurt their potential future children. He testified that learning about Raven's crimes had probably saved his life, since he was likely on her target list for eventual elimination. The broader community response was equally supportive. Neighbors, coworkers, and even strangers reached out to express admiration for my courage in standing up to someone who had terrorized multiple victims over many years. Several people credited my case with giving them the strength to report their own experiences with domestic violence or family abuse. My recovery, both physical and emotional, continued steadily after Raven's sentencing. The irregular heartbeats became manageable with medication, and therapy helped me process the trauma of being systematically abused by someone I had loved and trusted. Most importantly, I no longer lived in fear of what Raven might do next. The experience taught me that justice is not always immediate, but it can be thorough and complete when you have the patience and determination to document the truth carefully. Raven had spent years believing she was too smart and too privileged to face consequences for her actions, but the legal system ultimately held her accountable for every crime she had committed. 6 months after Raven's sentencing, I received a letter from her in prison, attempting to manipulate me into supporting her appeal. She claimed to have found religion, expressed fake remorse for her actions, and asked me to write a letter supporting her early release. I threw the letter away without finishing it and had no contact restrictions updated to prevent any future communication attempts. Today, almost a year after Raven tried to kill me, I am healthier and stronger than I have ever been. The money from the civil settlement allowed me to pay off my student loans, buy a house, and establish a scholarship fund for other survivors of domestic violence who need legal assistance. Have you ever had to cut off a toxic family member who crossed every possible line? How did you find the strength to choose your own well-being over family loyalty? Drop your stories in the comments below, because I know many of you have faced similar impossible choices with people who were supposed to love and protect you. Please smash that like button if this story gave you hope that justice can prevail even when it seems impossible, and subscribe for more real-life stories about overcoming betrayal and finding your inner strength. Share this video with anyone who needs to hear that they deserve better than toxic family members who refuse to change their harmful behavior. Thank you for listening to my journey from victim to survivor, to someone who stopped a dangerous criminal from hurting anyone else. Remember that you always have more power than you think, even when you are facing someone who seems untouchable. Sometimes the best revenge is simply refusing to let toxic people continue destroying lives without consequences.